So Kuro has finally released the full information on Phoebe's weapon, and if I'm being honest, there are a couple of mixed feelings I'm having about this weapon, because what makes this weapon special compared to other characters' signature weapons is that it has a split scaling type of buff, which increases the wielder's basic attack and heavy attack damage, but the substat gives you 36% critical rate, which can be a very versatile option for some characters that we have in the game so far. But for Phoebe herself, a critical damage substat of about 72%, like what we have on Judge's weapon, paired with the 500 base attack would have been a much better option. So in this video, I'm going to break down this weapon from pure stats increase perspective to help you decide whether you should pull for this weapon or not, and I'll offer some alternatives that actually have great synergy with her kit if you decide not to pull for her weapon. If this video proves helpful in any way, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to help support the channel because it helps me out tremendously. Luminous Hymn has a 500 base attack with 36% crit rate at level 90. The 500 base attack is a bit low compared to other weapons that have 587 base attack, but is equally compensated with a high 36% critical rate. This makes it very versatile on many characters that you choose to run them with this weapon, because critical rate is much valuable compared to critical damage when it comes to damage oriented stats in the game like attack and elemental damage bonus. In addition to that, it makes wielders of this weapon, including Phoebe herself, easy to build, because you have a decent crit ratio even if you miss a few substat rolls on your echoes. However, since Phoebe will be running the Eternal Radiance set, which gives you 20% critical rate when the enemy is inflicted with Spectral Frazzle, you'll most likely be overcapping on critical rate if you've already farmed a decent Eternal Radiance set, but we'll get into the crit analysis very shortly. For the first part of the passive, at rank 1, it provides a 12% attack. All type attribute damage bonus like what we have on Jinxie's weapon would have been much better since it's much harder to get and you can easily roll attack percentage on your echoes. For the second part of the passive, when you deal damage to enemies inflicted with Spectral Frazzle, it will grant the wielder 14% basic attack and 14% heavy attack damage bonus, stacking up to 3 times. This creates a huge problem for characters other than Phoebe, because to make this weapon work with another character like Encore, because of the basic attack damage buff, you need to pair her with another character like Spectral Rover to apply Spectral Frazzle, which will be a very terrible team composition because Encore's best team has nothing to do with Spectral Rover. So the second part of the passive will not work for most characters in the game. The third part of the passive will amplify the damage of Spectral Frazzle on enemies by 50% for 30 seconds when you perform an outro skill. Again, this can only work on Phoebe at the current state of the game, and the buff pairs well with her outro skill, Attentive Heart, if she's in the Confession state, shredding enemy spectral resistance by 10% and granting an additional 100% Spectral Frazzle damage amplification. But there's an issue with the third part of the passive as well, because I'm pretty sure most players will be playing Phoebe as a main DPS, so she'll most likely be in the Absolution state all the time, which will further increase the damage multiplier of her outro skill by 255%. So depending on how you play Phoebe, the third part of the passive might be useless without Confession, because the damage inflicted by Spectral Frazzle at 10 stacks is not that decent. So now let's create 2 possible scenarios, one where we have her weapon and another where we're using Jeji's signature weapon because of the high crit damage. And I want you guys to keep in mind that she'll be having crit damage on her skill tree for this analysis. With her weapon, you'll need to equip a critical damage 4-cost echo, so if you roll crit rate and crit damage on all your echoes, you should be looking at around 75% crit rate on 270% crit damage with mid-level crit rolls on your echoes. And keep in mind that we haven't even added the 20% crit rate from Eternal Radiance, so the final crit stat when engaged in battle will be around 95% crit rate on 270% crit damage, which will mean that you'll be overcapping on crit rate. Keep in mind that those who will be running Yinlin's signature weapon on Phoebe will have a much similar overall stats because the String Master also has a 36% crit rate. But if you're using a high crit damage weapon like Jeji's signature weapon for example, you will need to equip a critical rate for cost echo, so you should be looking at around 60% crit rate on 300% crit damage if you roll mid-level crit damage and crit rate substats on all the 5 pieces of your Eternal Radiance set. If we add the 20% crit rate that we get from Eternal Radiance, we get 80% crit rate on 300% crit damage, which is much better. So from this mid-level crit rolls analysis, we can all agree that having a crit damage substat would have been much better compared to critical rate on Phoebe's weapon, due to the 20% crit rates that we get from the Eternal Radiance set, with a much higher crit damage. And those who will be using Jeji's signature weapon on Phoebe will also have a bit higher overall damage compared to Yinlin's weapon because of the 30% difference in crit damage from the analysis that we did earlier. Now let's dive deeper into the passives of other weapons that have synergy with Phoebe's playstyle. The second passive on Jeji's signature weapon will be much better for Phoebe because using a resonance skill cast increases basic attack damage by 12%, stacking up to 3 times for 6 seconds. And the best part is that Phoebe can actually maintain 2 stacks for 6 seconds. If you take a look at the skill description of Phoebe's kit, pressing her skill button will place a ring of mirrors, and pressing it again will teleport Phoebe to the ring of mirrors location, helping her obtain the 24% basic attack damage buff due to 2 skill presses, much similar to Jeji's teleportation. And it doesn't stop there. When Phoebe is in the Ring of Mirrors, her Chamuel star consecutive basic attacks is considered as basic attack damage. So while you cannot maintain the 24% basic attack damage bonus for a long time with Jeji's weapon, it's a decent alternative to use if you cannot afford to pull for her signature weapon. The same thing applies to Yinlin's signature weapon, but you gain 24% attack instead after Phoebe's first skill cast to place a Ring of Mirrors and pressing her skill again to teleport, but you can maintain the attack buff for only 5 seconds, which is still a decent option if you cannot afford to pull for her signature weapon. Apart from those weapons, the Cosmic Ripples is also a decent option because of the 16% basic attack damage at rank 1, which you can easily get by just dealing damage with basic attacks. And keep in mind that the Chamuel's damage when she's in the Ring of Mirrors scales off basic attack, so you get more damage overall. Apart from Cosmic Ripples, your 4-star alternatives are not looking great if I'm being honest. The first one that I recommend is Augment because of the crit rate substat and the passive that boosts your attack after casting Phoebe's Liberation, but I'm not too sure if the Liberation cast will benefit from the attack buff, so I'll have to do more testing to find out in her dedicated guide, so be sure to look forward to that. Fusion Accretion is an okay option, but it's mostly suited for sub-DPS builds. If you don't have Augment, go with Fusion Accretion. The last option is Jinjo Keeper, which is the worst weapon that you could possibly use on your Phoebe, but if that's your only option, feel free to use it and change it when you get a better option. With everything I've covered so far, don't let me stop you from pulling Phoebe's weapon. I'm just trying to let you know what you're going in for if you decide to pull for her weapon, and other weapon alternatives that you have available if you cannot afford to pull for her signature weapon. Hope this video was helpful, and if YouTube gets it right, you should like this video that pops up on your screen, so be sure to give it a watch and join our Discord community if you're having any issues with the game or you just want a place to chill or hang out. Link will be in the video description. Catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.